Greg, the Biden administration announced on Thursday it has authorized the Pentagon to call up 3,000 reservists for deployment to Europe. Joe Biden says the call-up is necessary to augment the active armed forces of the United States in Operation Atlantic Resolve, which means for the effective conduct of U.S. military support to Ukraine. Of the 3,000 reservists being called up, the presidential order says as many as 450 can be from the individual ready reserve. The order comes as Joe Biden completed a 5-day trip to Europe, which included a visit with Britain's Prime Minister, King Charles, and a NATO meeting. House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer spoke out on Fox News Thursday night about the Secret Service's inability to find the source of that cocaine in the White House.
One of two things has happened here. Either, number one, the Secret Service is lying to us and they're covering for someone, or number two, they're incompetent, because this is supposed to be the most secure dwelling in America.
Comer says it's incredible the Secret Service gave up the investigation after 11 days when other government agencies spent 5 years investigating Biden family corruption.
Now, this morning, the Department of Education announced it will forgive over 800,000 borrowers $39 billion in federal student loans. 2 weeks ago now, the Supreme Court ruled that the Biden administration could not conduct his student debt handout program. So what's going on here? How are they getting around this?
Well, this is what happens when the American people do, and Congress itself, don't engage in proper check and balance to keep the president confined to delegated Article II authority. We don't teach this in the schools, on purpose, mind you. So the American people are really generally not aware that the president's authority is very limited and very defined for a very specific reason. Not only that, Alexander Hamilton remarked in Federalist 78 that the judiciary is the weakest branch. So this means Congress must step up and engage in their checks and balances. Congress has got to defund the executive branch and their ability to hand out money, and they need to start seriously talking about impeachment.
Yeah, I always wonder why in the world would you try to go around things when you've already lost in court. It tells me a lot about the president. Now, Joe Biden's calling up the United States military reserve units to deploy to active duty in Europe to support NATO's efforts on behalf of Ukraine. In March of 2022, Joe promised that the American U.S. troops would not be sent to fight in Ukraine on behalf of the nation's borders or in service against Russia. So is this a break of that promise?
You know, what's interesting is this really goes back to the very last question. It is not a constitutional authority of the President of the United States to call up troops unless there has been a formal declaration of war. There has not been a formal declaration of war since World War II. And the American people need to understand, and Congress needs to start enforcing their authority under Article 1, Section 15, limiting the president and its authority. This is what happens when the American people don't know their Constitution, don't require its adherence, and we allow the president to exercise power our founders explicitly and purposely denied the president.
Okay, so you're telling me then that Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan, none of those are declaration of war. That was all done by the president.
That was all done by unconstitutional authority by the President of the United States under the Unconstitutional War Powers Act.
Okay, staying on the military, House Freedom Caucus members were asked by a reporter today to elaborate how transgender reassignment surgery might influence battle readiness. They weren't ready for Congressman Ralph Norman. Here he is.
I'm sorry. You don't want people on the battlefield who are trying to decide if they're a man or a woman. Decide that before you go in. We want you to decide when you go in, you're going to protect and defend the freedoms of this country.
Chris, and we don't all have the monies to fund our military. We're running low on munitions. Does it make sense to spend dollars on sex changes for 0.5% of transgenders in the American service?
This is really the consequence of when we lose sight of the difference between a right and a benefit. Rights to freedom of speech, rights to freedom of conscience, the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. These are rights. These are natural rights. However, gender assignment and serving in the military are not rights. They are benefits. And the federal government and the military, the American people, do not have an obligation to provide people with benefits. Not everybody gets to serve in the military for certain reasons. And if you want a gender assignment surgery, then you need to do that on your own private time with your own private money.
I agree with you. Chris Ann Hall, thank you so much. Back to you in a moment.
Thank you.
Romans chapter 11, verse 3 and 4 says this, the Lord, they have killed your prophets, torn down your altars. I am alone left, and they seek my life. What does the divine response say to him? I have reserved myself 7,000 men who have not bowed their knee. There are times you feel like you're the only sane one left, and this is why you need to gather together with others of like precious faith from time to time.